This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome. Nice to have you with us again, Buck.
Always glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, tonight we're going to, embark on a rather erudite conversation we haven't done this too much before, but I think it's an important discussion to have, and that involves duty. So the idea that what exactly is duty? How does it impact our daily lives? Are we appropriately observing duties? Are these duties good duties, bad duties? What makes us act the way we do? And we had some kind of discussion about some of the historical, viewpoints on duty. And I know you're well grounded in this kind of subjects. So if you go back to the time of the Greeks, today, what was their viewpoint on duty?
Well, I think the best place to start is actually the meaning of the word, which I think is probably a mixture of law Latin and law French. And it literally means debt, something that is owed.
Yes.
So it's probably easier for people when they hear the word duty, who are listening tonight, just to think about in terms of debit and credit.
Yes.
That if you owe something to the bank, then
yes.
you have a duty to them.
Yes.
And they have a right over you, a right
yes.
to
yes.
that money
yes.
that you owe. Now, the ancient Greeks didn't really put it in those terms,
yes.
but one thing that you do find with the ancient Greeks is that they were very interested in civic virtue
yes.
and the roles of a citizen.
Yes.
And that was based largely on status,
yes.
on the nature of your birth, the fact that you were a citizen of Athens. And one of the first early examples we get of that, of course, is the trial and death of Socrates, when Socrates has been judged guilty for corrupting the youth of Athens.
Yes.
And his friends say, we can get you out of this. This is not right that,
yes.
that
yes.
you suffer for this. And Socrates' response is very much in terms of duty. He says, I have benefited
yes.
by being a citizen of Athens.
Yes.
This has done all sorts of good things to me. And now it's time for me to pay for that benefit.
Yes.
So you see that duty emerging.
Is this, I know that you have a legal background, to put it mildly, but are we getting into contract law here? In other words, you mentioned the idea of duty as being a debt, but when we assume duties, do we have sort of either an implicit or an actual contract about the duties we owe to everyone, to our country, to people in legal arrangements, to our spouse? Is this a contractual thing? What about duty? How do we?
Yeah, well, if we want to talk about it in strictly American legal terms for a minute, duties can come from a lot of different places. One is that if I contract with you, you're a neurosurgeon,
yes.
and I want you to work on my brain and do
yes.
what you can with it. There probably is not much you can do with this one. But if you sneeze during
I
a
can
surgery,
work wonders
yes,
sometimes.
yes, if you sneeze during a surgery
yes,
and mess
right,
up,
right,
there go the music lessons.
Right, yes.
Then I can say that you breached your contractual duty
yes.
to make me better, or
yes.
something like that.
Yes.
But then there are other types of duties. For instance, tort duties.
Yes.
And they still may be based on something that you voluntarily undertaken. When
yes.
I drove down here tonight,
yes.
The law imposed a duty on me to
yes.
other drivers to use a duty of care towards them.
Yes.
And that if I breached that duty, I could be liable to them for any damage that I caused. That's not really contractual, but it's still based on something I chose.
Well, if we could
yes.
bounce the basketball a little
mm-hmm.
bit, it seems that we might talk about a state of nature as our conversation
yes.
goes along. But just thinking about the duties that my ancestors were South Georgia farmers, they lived in South Georgia, well, let's say 100 years ago or 150 years ago. The duties they had, toward other people were thin because they didn't have much human contact. There was not. And then the situation these days is we have enormous human contact. And I guess the question I would ask is, we have these human contacts. Have there been duties imposed upon us that we might not have an actual contract? That we might not even know these duties exist. And you have thoughts about that?
Yes, and this actually takes us back to the Greeks again, because obviously when you look at Aristotle and he talks of man as a political animal, a social animal, that and that's why law is, broadly speaking, a social science, because how we have to act in regard to each other. Really, for most of human existence, the idea of duty was based on status, and status we can define as the ability or the capacity to assume duties of your own free will or to exercise rights of your own free will. So for most of human history, if you're born a slave, or if you're born an Athenian citizen, or if you're born a woman, then there's really not much you can do about these things, and those things confer upon you certain rights and duties. It's not really until the last 500 or 600 years that we come up with the idea that you can voluntarily choose your duties and exercise your rights. And the great legal historian Henry Maine, 150 years ago, said that the history of law is the history of the development or evolution from status to contract, to voluntarily contracting with people. So the question that I think you're bringing up here is, now that society is getting more crowded, we have more dealings with people, are we moving from contract back into status? That because you're an American citizen in a crowded 21st century bureaucratic America, we're going to impose duties on you whether or not you choose them.
Well, that's a good point, isn't it? I mean, if we could just bounce the basketball a little bit about that, there may be a reciprocal relationship between liberty and duty. So, once again, going back to the state of nature, presumably you could just freely do whatever you would do, and then if you wanted to enter into a contract to accept a quid pro quo arrangement with your fellow human, you could do these things, and it would be pretty well spelled out. But it seems to me one of the things happening is the duties that are being extracted from us are being done without a contractual relationship. And we have lots and lots of new duties that are being imposed every day on American citizens without a contractual connection to get those. You take my point?
Yes, and it's the fiction of the social contract. If you go back to Hobbes and to Locke, and you find a great deal of this in Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, that we voluntarily enter into a contract with our fellow citizens and with governments, whereby we give up rights to do things that we may want to in exchange for a larger benefit. We sacrifice our immediate self-interest for a greater good. Well, when I was born, nobody asked me to sign a contract. They simply said that I was a signatory, if you will, to this social contract, and I don't really have the option of opting out. And I think that's more and more what you see from the modern state.
Well, just to continue to talk about it, I mean, you could say that maybe laws impose duties on us, and that when we have our legislature, we elect people, and we give them the privilege of, I guess, acting as our agent to obtain benefits for us, and at the same time impose duties upon us. I mean, and so maybe that seems acceptable. I mean, in a way, any comments about that? Is that a fair?
Yes, that's the idea of the social contract, but I can posit a situation where you have a citizen who disagrees with every single law that his agents have ever imposed upon him. So that's where the problem of the social contract arises. What if you just don't agree? And that way lies a great deal of danger. The modern militia movements, terrorists, revolutionaries. So
we're getting to rather deep water here in a way as we consider liberty and duty. Some of the in way duty shades into law, but a lot of the duties that are being foisted upon American citizens, I think, is it fair to say these duties have been put upon us by courts and by federal bureaucrats that or any kind of bureaucrat that propagate different kinds of duties without our agents directly assessing this. For instance, the Environmental Protection Agency does whatever it does. Homeland protection agencies do this or do that, and regulations just come upon us from every source. The courts say, well, you now have this duty to do this, even though there's no contractual. Any comments about that?
Yes, well, welcome to the wonderful world of modern administrative law.
Yes.
That I believe that the first real administrative agency at the federal level was the Interstate Commerce Commission back around 1887
yes.
to regulate railroads.
Yes.
And from there it's just grown and grown, and these people, of course, are not elected. And they're not even particularly responsible to Congress.
Yes.
Congress establishes the Bureau and
Yes.
then very largely lets it run on its own.
Yes.
These administrative agencies sometimes even have their own essential court systems. They're called Article I courts to
Yes.
distinguish them from the regular court systems. And of course the bureaucrats are not elected, and the idea of the faceless
Yes,
bureaucrat,
yes.
not responsible. It's the executive branch, and the
Yes.
executive branch is by far the biggest. So,
Yes.
yes, that's where the source of duty is.
Well, if you keep talking about it, I mean, if you mentioned the definition of the word duty, and
Yes.
words have, I guess, flavors to them and pejorative context, and the word duty really is a rather nice word in a way. It's duty, honor, country. Did I get
Yes.
that right at
Yes.
West Point? And
Duty
so
is
it's
the first
something, a
one,
duty.
so.
Everyone is to have a duty is something that's honorable.
Yes.
I mean, and could someone abuse the notion of the American citizens' duties? Can they have any comments about that? Could
Oh,
they-
certainly the creation of some sort of hypothetical entity, and I think the Democrats were edging toward this in their the Democratic Convention recently, when they talked about government being the thing that holds us together. And once you've established the government as this organic government that is our father, that is our
Yes.
patrias, the paternal side,
Yes.
then it can make you do what it wants to. Everybody from Alexander Hamilton to John
Yes,
Thomas
yes,
Jefferson, who
yes.
had huge disagreements
Right,
with each
right,
other,
right.
are turning over in their graves when,
Right.
For them, government's a necessary evil. It's
Right.
not a positive good. And so I think this is a real revolution in thinking that you're seeing happening,
Well,
and not a good one.
I'm glad you
Yes.
you identified that, and so one of the things that goes on is we have the political discourse and interchange in our daily lives
Yes.
here. It's very easy for the sophistry of words to lead the
Yes.
country and humans into error,
Yes.
is it not?
Yes,
Is that a fair
it is.
statement?
And with modern media, and your discipline is closer to this than mine is, but the deification of the public figure, the obvious example being the movie star,
Yes.
but really anyone in the public light.
Yes.
When Harrison Ford was filming a movie here in Macon a few weeks
Yes.
ago, there were actually photographs in the newspaper of the booth where Harrison Ford and Chris Maloney
Yes.
sat. They weren't even in it. What is
Right.
it about? This is a very dangerous thing with when you combine the power of politics with modern media.
Yes,
it's very dangerous.
Well, maybe we can go back and dissect the idea of the citizen and government.
Yes.
Some of the ideas, and I guess the whole way the country was created, at least the idea, the intellectual underpinning of the country is that citizens existed as free entities and with a divine relationship in a way. They were the children of God. They were put here as His creatures, and they surrendered rights to the government in this contractual arrangement. And the government sprang from its citizens the same way the federal government sprang from the states. Yeah, and there's a contractual checks and balances that exist, and you could say the government is inferior to the people. Is that a fair thing to
Yes,
say?
and you could have read what you just said straight from the Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
It's all in there. A quick digression for a minute. If we look at the broad political spectrum, and getting back to your idea of contract, not
Yes.
just social
Right,
contract,
right,
but
yes,
private
yes.
contract, if we imagine for a moment a system of anarchy. Now, this is
Yes.
a benevolent anarchy. This is a situation where human beings are almost angels.
Yes.
They're naturally
Right,
good.
right.
Then everything could be contract-based.
Yes.
And that the ultimate statement of freedom is I choose to do or not to do this.
Yes.
I will
Right,
do or
right,
will
yes,
not do
yes.
this. That's the ultimate freedom.
Right.
Now, on the other end of the political spectrum is tyranny.
Yes.
Something like Nazi Germany,
Right,
the
right,
most
right, yes.
authoritarian system you could imagine. There is no freedom of contract whatsoever. It is all
Yes,
status.
yes, yes.
And instead of the pronoun I, we change that sentence to say you will or will not do
Right,
this.
right, right.
and it's the change of a pronoun, and it's the change from contract to status.
Yes, yes.
The change from very limited government or no government
Right.
to government is the be-all and end-all.
Right, right. In a way, the government in this kind of, I guess, methodology
Yes.
would be they would define status. So the government is going to define you possibly in a protected class. The government can say you're a protected class or a non-protected class. And if you're in a non-protected class, then it's kind of, you could be put in the pillory and just basically. So the government is doing all kinds of things to people. They're categorizing them, and they're giving them rights or taking rights away from them, giving them status or taking status away from them. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. And if you look at the history of American society, it is a history of, generally speaking, greater inclusion in what we'll call the community with full rights.
Yes.
What about Native American Indians? What about slaves? What about free blacks who are not technically slaves? What about women?
Yes.
And of course, the big one today is what about the unborn?
Yes.
And another big one today is what about the illegal immigrant?
Yes, yes.
So those are the two big ones.
So we have we have a lot of complexities about how this system is working. And just to keep talking about a system with duties, the assumption is, if I could say it this way, that if this contractual arrangement is going forward, and that people are morally good and are, I guess, creatures of God, if one wants to say it that way, they're going to enter into good contracts. But if that's not the case, then the contractual arrangements going on could be way off kilter, and the government could start, I mean, as the creature of this arrangement, could start to impose duties that could be very evil duties.
Yes.
They could say, well, you've got to do all kinds of bad things to fulfill your responsibilities to the state or the organisms that are forcing these duties upon you.
Yes. Well, I think a good example of that from say, your generation would be the Vietnam conflict, about which we've occasionally talked, that conscription, of course, is something that Americans don't question, at least constitutionally. So what happens if you are drafted and you are told it is your duty to go into the military, and then it is your duty to engage in a conflict that you believe to be grossly immoral?
Yes, yes.
And I think that's the problem that you're talking about. And there's always been an out, the idea of the conscientious objector.
Yes.
But when you're talking about an entire army fighting an entire war, it creates big problems. And I think this is one of the first deep distrusts of American government that we have seen in the modern age.
Yes. So. Well, maybe just continuing to talk about duties. Can duties be expanded so much? Let's suppose that the government or its agents wanted to put a particular business out of. They just didn't like. They didn't like the people that had a particular business. And they could start, through their agents, impose so many duties of one type or another that agency could no longer exist in its present structure.
Well, this sounds to my ear that the immediate thing I think of is Mayor Rahm Emanuel and his statements about Chick-fil-A just a few weeks ago that were clearly violative of the Constitution. It chilled First Amendment rights. That the owner of Chick-fil-A made statements about his condemnation of same-sex marriage, and Rahm Emanuel, apparently speaking in his official capacity, essentially threatened Chick-fil-A not to come to Chicago or to get out of Chicago, or he would use secular power to retaliate against that expression of opinion that's protected by the First Amendment.
Now, just to keep talking about this, the government agencies have the power to impose duties to basically construct the world they want, regardless of what its citizens want. And you mentioned Chick-fil-A. I'll mention something a little closer at home: medicine. So, if the new arrangement that's coming down the line, if the agencies that exist to regulate medicine can really structure, and this is 1/6 of the nation's economy, they can do whatever they want. They can propagate rules because this enormous amount of power is coming to their hands. These agencies can propagate rules or do whatever they want, and basically just if they want to step on you, they could do that. Do citizens have recourse to this kind of thing? I mean, is there recourse? What do you do if that happens? If
Well,
if the agencies are propagating duties?
Yes. Well, before we even get to the recourse, let's set up the problem. Let's say that at some point the court declares that that health care is a human right or a constitutional right.
Right.
And the court has created rights out of thin air like
Yes,
that before.
yes.
So if I have a right to health care, and if we further assume that health care is a limited resource,
Yes.
then it may become your duty, not as a doctor, but
Right.
just as a fellow citizen,
right.
to give up some of your health care so that I can have some of it.
Yes.
And the government will be your enforcer.
Yes.
And the question is, what can I do about it? Well, obviously, I can go in and vote out my congressman, but you see the problem with that. What if
Yes.
it's very hard to vote out incumbents who are not limited by term limits?
And to say this, the way the system is put together is some of the overarching legal principles enshrined by the Supreme Court make it difficult for mere legislature to assault this. I mean, without tremendous abilities to do so, it would be very difficult.
That's correct.
That would be a hard thing to do. Well, I continue to be worried about this a little bit, about what can happen with the putting duties on people. If you violate these duties, then all kinds of bad things could happen to you. You could presumably go to prison, you could lose everything, all kinds of things could happen. Is that correct? Punitive measures could be or are undertaken routinely.
Certainly, yes. Well, criminal law, and you've got a shotgun approach.
Yes.
So, for instance, if the state puts you under a duty to have insurance,
Yes.
auto insurance,
Yes.
it can do many things. You have to have proof of insurance before a license,
Yes.
driver's license will be issued. If you're caught without the insurance, you could be
Right.
given jail time.
Right.
So they could give you a variety of both civil and criminal penalties in order to
Yes.
to coerce you
Yes.
into doing that. And that's, in the bureaucratic state, that is not at all a rare thing.
Could the government enforce a whole set of duties upon protected classes or protected any kind of constituency that the government wants to endorse, protect a spouse? I mean, can they not? If you say maybe, I mean,
Yes.
you could pick any protected class you want. You might pick people that live near redwoods or whatever, and they could.
Yes. It certainly can. Now, I do think you have to make a distinction between the federal and the state governments. That the state governments have traditionally had more freedom to do that. And once again, I'm speaking traditionally
Yes,
here.
yes.
That has been seen as less of a threat. If we
Yes.
go back to the year 1800, every white person living
Yes.
in Georgia
Yes.
are going to have the same
Right,
genetic
right,
background.
right,
They're going to
yes.
have the same way of making a living.
Right, right.
They're going to have the same religion.
Right.
And since it's so small a community,
Right.
You as a Georgian of the year 1800 are probably related to half
Right.
the state legislature.
Right.
So the state will
Right.
will truly be reflecting your
Right,
will a lot
right,
more closely.
right.
So it's all right to give the state what is called the police power over health,
Right,
safety,
right,
welfare,
right.
and yes, morals, with the
Right.
idea of the Sunday Blue Law.
Right.
So-
Now, one of the things going on is you sort of touched upon the demographic change in the country.
Yes.
We have such a diverse country, and there are many constituencies that didn't exist. Pick your year, 100 years ago, 200 in the country. It's not a homogeneous population by
Yes,
any means.
yes.
And the government is putting duties, lots and lots of duties to, I guess, maintain social peace.
Yes.
And it's a pretty impressive process. Is there any way that's numerically judged? I mean, any way you could say we have now 12,000 laws, 1 million, any comments? Anybody do that?
This is more anecdotal, but it is factual. It's probably not enough to achieve statistical accuracy. But I do a lot of work in the very early period of national law. And the volume 1 of a series called The Statutes at Large, which is the chronological reprinting of laws passed by Congress.
Yes.
So volume 1 of the Statutes at Large, of which I actually have a real brick and mortar copy, covers all laws passed by Congress from 1789 down, I believe, to 1801. if I remember correctly. It may even be longer than that. It's certainly as late as 1801. So more than 10 years worth of laws, and it's one volume. It's the largest volume. It's one volume. Yes. If you were to go to your nearest law library and get the latest copy of the statutes at large off the shelf, it has about 3 times the pages of volume 1. It covers 6 months.
Yes.
So I think that tells you something.
So there's a tremendous number of regulations going on.
And that's not even regulations, that's just laws.
Just to talk about this, if we have these duties that are imposed, at the same time, the country's substantial economic difficulties, and that we'd like to see capitalism or the free market rescue everyone and provide jobs and give people work. If the government is imposing duties, so many duties, doesn't it make the normal marketplace less efficient and thus less able to provide the cornucopia of wealth and jobs the country would like?
Well, I'm not sure if John Maynard Keynes would agree with that, but that is certainly an argument to be made. Ayn Rand would certainly agree with that. I think Milton Friedman would. And that brings us to an interesting point about the tension between liberty and property constitutionally.
Yes.
Liberty, whatever that word means. And I think it's very interesting. You can look at the 2 major parties today, the Republican and the Democrat, and this model just works amazingly. The Democratic Party would say, we have no concern for property, but don't you dare touch the citizens' liberty.
Yes.
Whereas the Republicans are the flip side. We are not concerned so much with liberty, but do not touch our property, do not touch our pocketbooks.
Yes.
Now, of course, the variable, the wild card in this is, what does that word liberty mean?
Just so.
Yes.
Just so.
And the Republicans and Democrats both have very specific ideas by what they mean by that term liberty, and they don't necessarily agree, and that term has differed over time as well.
Okay, now we're almost near the end of our interchange.
Yes.
However, tonight we'll have another one. But maybe you could opine upon what happens. We mentioned liberty, we mentioned rights, and we mentioned duty. But when somebody gives you a right, or you could, I'll just say that, they give you a right to something, doesn't that imply some restriction on liberty and some increase in duty? You have like 30 seconds.
30 seconds is easy. Generally speaking, in legal terms, it's fairly accepted. It's open to some debate, but fairly accepted that a right in one person implies a duty in another. If I have a duty to drive safely, then other people have a right to be compensated if I don't. They have a right to expect that I'll drive safely. So one person's right is another's duty.
So we're about to close here.
Yes.
But it is on that note to say, when people are offering you rights and saying, here's a right, or here's a new thing we're giving you,
yes,
it's either it's going to take something from another person or
yes,
possibly take something from you to enjoy that right.
Yes.
So
yes,
it's not a free lunch.
It is not.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Buck.
Glad to be here.
We'll talk
Thank
to
you.
you some more.
Indeed.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.